Hello, I'm Neil Whelan, and welcome to the Wesleyan Podcast. We begin the new year with Monica Pacult talking to legal consultant Sunita Jordan. Sunita specialises in helping the dentistry profession. After beginning her career at the British Dental Association, she set upon her own, providing legal advice to practices before eventually buying into and managing a dental practice herself. If you're a dentist, you'll be well aware of the legal issues you face, not just with patients, but also running a business. So hopefully what Sunita tells us here will resonate with you. As always, this podcast is for information only and doesn't provide either financial or legal advice, although I'll be back at the end to tell you how to get in touch with us. And with that, I'll hand you over to Sunita. And first up, Monica.
So you're a legal consultant advisor to the dental sector. Do you think you could tell me a little bit more about your role and what areas you support dentists in? I know you told me a little bit at the show, but do you think you could tell me in a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So, firstly, thanks for inviting me on this. It's
It's
great
a pleasure.
to be on this podcast. So I started off my kind of career in dentistry when I started working for the British Dental Association after I did my law degree. So I did a law degree, thought I'd go down the usual kind of route of solicitor and working in a solicitor's practice, but I actually luckily got a job with the British Dental Association, which was a great kind of start to the career. And it was a job within the legal team where we advised dentists on kind of all kinds of things, on basically their contracts, how to employ staff, all the HR elements of employing staff, also the associate contracts that that dentists have between each other, or an associate with a practice owner. So all of those things. There was also the time when the new NHS contract came in, so there was a lot of change going on in the dental world. So I worked with the British Dental Association and basically gave advice to practice owners and practice managers on what I now know was a very legalistic kind of way of doing things, really, and not entirely practical. But anyway, I worked there for about 7 years, and then eventually set off on my own to be a legal consultant. I had 2 little kids at the time, so I worked from home. And then eventually I actually bought in and co-owned a dental practice with a dentist in Wimpole Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I managed a dental practice myself, which then really made me realize how impractical all the advice that I'd given before was, because it's very easy to tell a practice manager or a practice owner who's called you up, do this, do that, have a disciplinary hearing, all of these sort of things. But when you're actually in the job, and you're doing 101 million things in a day, it's very difficult to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to have a disciplinary hearing with somebody to sort out poor performance or whatever it may be, because most people don't want to confront. Most people are non-confrontational, really. They don't want to deal with areas of confrontation. So a lot of the time people put it off as much as possible. If there's no time for things, you have close relationships with your staff that you don't particularly want to ruin. There's all kinds of things that go on in a practice that I had no idea of. I mean, it was very easy for me to just say to someone over the phone, do this and do that. But when you're actually in the post itself, it's very hard. So
So it sounds like planning, sorry to interrupt you quickly, it sounds like planning is a really key part of that, and for practice managers to have contracts in place and to have good plans in place to sort of help avoid these situations.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, as a legal consultant, what happens a lot of the time is practice owners and managers will call me up when things have gone wrong. And so my job is usually to sort things out when it's gone beyond a certain state. And it's a shame, really, because a lot of the time things could have been avoided a lot earlier with planning, with contracts. A lot of the time contracts are there, but people don't really know what's in it. There's a lot of the time you might get a template contract from anywhere. You could get a template contract from ACAS or from the BDA or from your HR provider or whatever, which is just a blank contract. And people will fill it in, but not knowing exactly how to fill things in correctly. And so then when it comes to a dispute, that's the only time people look at their contracts and realize that maybe it's not fit for purpose. Or that different things could have been done very early on, especially things like having, appraisal meetings, or even doing things like disciplinary hearings that could have prevented a situation from kind of escalating to where it eventually does, where they then might need me to help them terminate a contract, for instance, or sort out a big disciplinary issue where it's actually then causing a problem in the morale of the team and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think planning is a big part of it, but it's a difficult thing because you as a practice manager, you don't have enough time to do all those things.
Yes, you
You
sort of
don't
need
have,
the right support really
yeah, you
from
do.
day
Yeah,
one.
yeah, you do really.
What would you say are the top things, the key things that you work on with dentists when helping them to run their business?
I mean, a lot of it is really contracts. I think contracts are the key element that I tend to work with dentists who are, especially are setting up their contract, setting up their practices, whether they've bought them over from somebody else or whether they're setting up a brand new practice by themselves. So the contract is really quite important because yes, a lot of the time people will be given a blank contract, a template contract where they will fill it in, but you want to start off on the right note. So a lot of the time people might have a practice that they've just bought over, and then those contracts are quite old. They've never been updated. Nobody's ever looked at them. Nobody really knows what it contains. And really what dentists need to have is a contract that fits them. So things like, what they might, how they might want to set up their hours, even things like what, uniform people might have to wear. Social media is a big thing that a lot of the old contracts don't have anything about. So use of social media is something that is very important to have in contracts now, which most old contracts wouldn't have had at all. So there's plenty of things that can be tailor-made to a practice. That means that all staff start off on the same contract rather than having higgledy-piggledy kind of contracts all over the place where, one person has an old contract that has X on it, even holidays might be different, all kinds of things. So contracts is a big thing. Recruitment is a big thing, as I've already kind of mentioned. And then really it's talking about kind of disciplinary hearings and how to handle them, how to kind of go about how to go about hearings when things have gone wrong.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a lot to cover, isn't it, for a busy dentist?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And also, I mean, most of the time it's with managers, and unfortunately with managers, they're not trained either. I mean, it could be a manager that has come from previously being a nurse or receptionist, and they've been promoted in the practice. So a lot of the time they don't have the training
Business
required.
training either.
Yeah.
No. Well, that's it, isn't it? I suppose the dental training process is, very rigorous, and that's well supported, and they spend years learning to be dental technicians, to be dentists. But then when it comes to running, this busy dental practice, what sort of support or training is available to the average dentist, if any, in terms of
Yeah.
running their business?
Not a lot. I mean, in the past, I think the Eastman used to run which I did sometimes, was a day course on HR. But I mean, you
Right.
can't cram all of HR into one day. It's boring. It's difficult to kind of absorb. There needs to be something that is given throughout your career, because unless you're a hospital dentist or you're going into the armed forces or something like that, at most dentists are either going to go in, start their careers as associates and eventually become a practice owner, or they become practice owners immediately. So, they need that from day one, really.
Yeah, definitely. And when setting up a limited company, so if they go straight into being a practice owner, what do you think dentists should be aware of? What do you think is a really important thing to be aware of?
Well, I mean, a lot of dentists end up starting. As far as owning a practice and having a limited company, it's useful because you can pay all your staff through there. You have lots of tax advantages to owning a limited company, and that most importantly, there's also separation between your company assets and your personal assets, so that there is this sort of differentiation when you have a limited company. Um, you can also have other shareholders in your limited company, which also might help. You could have your spouse as a shareholder. So there are plenty of advantages, I think. And I mean, most people will have accountancy advice to give them all those sort of advantages and disadvantages. But I think what is quite important to note is that the administration that comes with owning a limited company is massive. Again, most accountants will do these things for you, but your accounts need to be a lot more comprehensive. That there's a lot of form filling, all kinds of things. I think especially if you are an NHS practice owner, there are lots of rules and obligations that come with having an NHS contract. So it's not so easy to buy and sell your practice if you have a limited company. There's also tax implications when you sell your practice. But most importantly, I think, which is something that that dentists need to be aware of, especially now, is not if you're a practice owner, but if you're an associate and you set up a limited company. So associates are self-employed on the whole, and a lot of associates have set up limited companies over the years because they have been self-employed and they want to retain a self-employed status. But this has been a controversial sort of topic with dentistry for a long time, and it's sudden. It's not suddenly, but over the past maybe 5-10 years, it's been coming to the fore where the HMRC may no longer recognize associates as self-employed. And a lot of associates I speak to will say something like, oh no, don't worry, I'm definitely self-employed. I work for a number of practices. I've got a limited company. I'm safe. So on one hand, yes, you could be seen as self-employed as far as tax is concerned. So in terms of your income tax that you're paying, but on an employed basis or on an employment law basis, you may not be seen as a self-employed contractor because there are lots of other elements to how you work that would be more in terms of how you an employee or worker than a self-employed person. So the fact that you own a limited company is not one of those. So you could own a limited company thinking this is going to make me self-employed, but in employment law that doesn't really matter. So a lot of the time it's this sort of safety blanket that people kind of think, well, oh, it's okay, I have a limited company. But the role of associates in the self-employed workplace is going to change dramatically. It has already. And so people do need to be aware of that, and they need to get some advice on it, really, because it's not as simple as that, really.
Yeah, it does. It certainly does sound very complex. And another important thing to mention really is partnership agreements. What are your thoughts on anyone going into a practice partnership? How important is it to have a robust partnership agreement in place before you go into a partnership?
Oh, it's absolutely essential. I mean, long gone are the days when people used to have gentlemen agreements and just shake hands on a partnership, really. I mean, now there are lots more various sort of factors that need to be included. So, I mean, the advantages of having a partnership agreement is just the fact that you know how things work, so how decisions are going to be made, or I think what happens a lot of the time is people think, oh, I'm going to go into partnership with my friend that I went to university with, and we get on great. So it's like marriage, isn't it? The same sort of thing. You go into it thinking this is going to be rosy and fantastic forever. And you kind of always think that, oh, if you have a prenuptial agreement, it destroys the romance of it. Similar
Yes.
to partners, really, in that, you go in thinking very positively and you think this is going to be the most fantastic partnership ever. And you don't maybe have as much of a guard on as to how you're going to decide things in the future. But I mean, on the whole, I think most people do now have partnership agreements. But it is really essential because you need to talk about decisions, how decisions are to be made, how profits are to be distributed, what happens if one party wants to leave. That's the most important side of it, really, is what happens if there's a dispute between the partners and one wants to sell their share or buy out, or whatever they might want to do. Also, if there's an illness of one of the partners, then what happens if one dies, all those sorts of things. So the partnership agreement does cover all those things. But this is not just important for partners, it's important for all relationships in a practice. So again, not that many practices will not have employment contracts, but I still come across some where there aren't any employment contracts at all. And you can say, how on earth could you have a relationship like this without anything written down as to what is going to happen? Yeah. So employment contracts are very important, and so are associate contracts. Especially now, because with the HMRC, they have in the past recognized the BDA contract as being the one which is sort of exemplary for self-employment status. But even that's had to change and adapt. So having an associate agreement is absolutely essential. So in all respects, I think this idea of having things in writing is actually really important, and that's throughout all kinds of things. So whether it's someone in a practice, a manager telling an employee to make sure they come on time, there's you could even just putting it in writing eventually in an email to say, I felt that you haven't come on time for a number of occasions, maybe sort out your timekeeping, something like that. That actually just having something in writing is really, really important, because it shows that it's been done rather than relying on just sort of
word of mouth.
word of mouth. Yeah.
You'd think that all things like all bases would be covered for this sort of thing, but I'm guessing, if you're a busy dentist and you're concentrating on practicing dentistry, a number of things, without having the correct support, a number of things will inevitably get overlooked and, could have consequences to this.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and now there's far more paperwork that needs to be done by dentists. I mean, CQC regulations are tough. There's lots of admin involved, loads of tick boxing, loads of forms, loads of checklists, everything. So keeping up with that is very, very difficult, really. I mean, you can almost need a full-time person just dealing with something like that. So there are far more demands on dentists now than there ever were. So running a practice is definitely not easy. So hats off to all of these people who do. Really, it's not an easy job at all.
No, it certainly sounds really quite challenging and demanding, but with the right people helping, such as yourself, it can be made a bit easier. Well, Sunita, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really insightful and interesting, and thank you for sharing and discussing a bit more about your role. And I hope we have you on again soon.
Thank you for having me, Monica. It was really a pleasure.
And that's our show for this week. Thank you to Monica and Sunita. If you are looking for expert financial advice, go to wesleyan.co.uk, where you can book a no obligation appointment with one of our specialist financial advisors. To learn more about Wesleyan more generally, you can find us on Twitter, X, and Facebook, Instagram, and of course LinkedIn. And if you found what you've heard here useful, you can like and subscribe to us on all the usual podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube, where there's a whole library of videos covering a wide range of financial planning topics. But that's it for now. So until next time, thanks for listening.